I'm one of those people that always roots for the underdog. So I was actually happy Georgia won.
So when he leaves tonight,
yeah,
make sure he doesn't take that.
He doesn't know. My laptop's
Who's the underdog?
Went strolling around downtown today.
With who?
You two yahoos.
Yeah, somebody came in here and Jody had just put paperwork out and everything was here. Then we got a call from Toby over at the computer place. Hey, I'm missing a computer. We're like, not that I'm aware of. We walked in here and the laptop was gone. So they grabbed it, brought it over there, tried to sell it to him, and he popped it open and saw my name on it and goes, hey, this is stolen.
So did he report the guys? And
he called here, and then I called down to the PD and had Officer McGowan go down and got the video footage, and he's like, "Oh yeah, it's so and so and so and so."
yeah, the sad part is they won't do anything about it.
No.
State of affairs now is you can steal whatever you want, take whatever you want. You get a slap on the wrist, and you're back out.
Well, they say you learn your lesson. They don't even slap your wrist anymore.
Oh, that's true.
So I haven't started that yet. I haven't started the meeting with that one yet.
Okay.
I don't know if Teddy's coming in.
I don't know. I haven't heard from him, but Erica will not be attending.
At all, in any format.
Correct. She is working late because of the temperature in her line of work.
We've got an update. Do we care about the update?
Yes.
So we want to restart
no.
now? We want another time?
Yep. What's weird is there's only one meeting,
Yeah,
but when I looked at her
it says
agenda,
7, but it's, yeah, because it
it's
should
the
be
same
6.
meeting number.
You want that?
Yeah, I love it. Thank you. Well, it's 5:57. I'm going to go ahead and start.
Teddy is not coming in. Just so you know.
Nobody's coming in.
Teddy might still be upset from that overtime loss for St. Louis.
Well, it's the city of LA because the organization sold out the great city of St. Louis. And yes, the Rams continue to be a poverty franchise, absolutely useless to the greater.
And it's recording, so it's doing all the good things. We have a quorum, barely, but.
And are we expecting Steve in person?
No idea. I don't know whether he'll come for this special one or not, so. Oh, it's on speaker view. Can you change it so that it's on gallery view instead of speaker view? Rick? Just be lovely.
So you want the 360 instead?
Well, no, if you, right now it's on speaker view, so that the person, no, I mean, the Zoom, not the owl, the Zoom.
Should be able to change that on the laptop, Carol?
So if it, no, because it's with the owl laptop or the owl computer, not with the.
You're just lucky we got a computer. We would have had to use Carol's.
So upper right-hand corner,
Yes,
just
dear.
change it to gallery. Yeah, much better, much better.
We would have used Carol's laptop tonight.
And it would have been chained to my neck.
Well, maybe that's the next step, is that we have to chain down these laptops.
No, that cabinet locks and I have a key. So when I come in tomorrow
I
morning,
was gonna say, do we have a key?
we do. And I'm gonna take the laptop and I'm just gonna put it in there. And
Yeah.
then we'll have to, I'll give Jody a key and we'll have to pull it out when we're.
But we still have,
The camera.
the owl is
The
out,
camera's
and
twice
all
as
the
much
microphones and
money
all
as
the,
that.
Yeah.
laptop was.
Do we need a camera to monitor the camera?
You know, that's not a bad idea.
They can watch out for each other.
We can put the laptop camera monitoring that camera. Then we'll know if one of them goes away.
Well, we got one more minute. I mean, if you want to get us.
Not according to this. What do you want me to do?
Oh,
We're
hit
recording.
record? Oh,
Oh,
okay.
yeah, we're already recording. And aardvark? Or is it something?
There we go. I'm just getting my computer so it will. There we go.
You need help, Lucas, or you got it?
No. It's common practice that the IT person has the oldest laptop.
You know, that's
Oldest
very
and
true.
slowest.
Okay, so it is 6 o'clock. I see that we do have a quorum, so I will call the meeting to order. And this is the special meeting of the Barre City Council. And maybe it will be a short time period if we have this limited number of people. So is there anything for adjustments to the agenda? Just going through the motions. I believe everything else is for the later agenda. One more counselor is present. Hi, Jake.
We can't quite tell who you are. It's like this.
Ninja.
So cold, you need to do it.
It is cold. So, do you have any adjustments for the special session? Okay. So my computer's still trying to think. But there is only one item for new business at this point. This is review of the town meeting day funding requests. So counselors, I'm assuming everyone has gone out to the SharePoint site and reviewed the information that was presented. Okay. So to kick us off. So Carol, one thing I noted in the different folders is one that comes in every different shape and form and size and number of attachments and Word versus PDF and
Yeah,
you must have had fun with that.
and one of the first things that I do when I get them is make sure that they, at least in some form, are complete. And there were, times when I had to say, I'd send emails back to people and say, this is a good start. Now you need to send me A and B and C. One of the most common problems was, we've got 3 or 4 narrative questions, and they would just submit their annual report, which contains the data, but I'd say to them, have you ever been served on a grant review committee? What you got to do is you got to follow the format. You got to answer the questions in the order. You've got to, There were some who didn't submit a separate board listing, but they submitted their 990 and their board is listed in their 990. So, it was depending on how strict the city wants to get. I mean, as far as I could tell, every one of them was complete. But if the city wants to get more strict in the future with regards to format, we can certainly review the application materials and, make some adjustments.
Yeah.
Whether people actually follow those, nobody. I mean, the first thing that happened is I emailed the new policy to everybody back in July when it went into effect. And then most of them didn't even read it. So we were playing catch up with that, but.
Yeah, I think I don't want to be as much red tape as say applying for a grant through the state of Vermont.
Yeah.
I know how tedious that can be. And specifically, we've had USDA grants where it was not accepted because we didn't have all the paperwork in place.
Yeah.
So I don't really want to be that nitty gritty and unless the council would like to be. Okay.
Well,
You have your-
hold up.
Councilor Booton?
Well, I mean, if it's, I don't think that we should have to go through the documents to search out the information. So I don't want to get into a habit where we want the board members and then they submit their tax returns and that has that on there. I think it should be, I think it all should be on, you know, a very clear, and this year doesn't matter, right? But like going forward, I think that's something we should set for an expectation.
I mean, I certainly have written enough grants in my life that I know that the very first thing you do is make sure that you have formatted it exactly the way the grant questions appear in the order that they request the documents. Because I've sat on enough grant review panels where we have $1 million worth of requests and $300,000 worth of money. And the very first thing you do is eliminate everybody who didn't follow the instructions. Now, this is obviously a different kind of approach, but I think establishing some kind of expectation with regards to, you know, the order of items, formatting, such like that is not, I think that makes sense.
I agree with that, because as I was going through it, I had to hunt and peck to figure out what was where and what meant what. And it would have been so much easier if it was in one loop.
One, you mean document, like?
Yeah.
Well,
F it all
either
together?
that or, you know, that all the paperwork, because different submissions had different kinds of paperwork, it seemed like.
Well, and they're going to, anyway, we're dealing with organizations that have $1 million budgets and organizations that have $15,000 budgets and, you know, do their accounting on a spreadsheet as opposed to, you know, accounting software and don't have to file 9. I mean, so there's going to be differences, but still there's no reason why they can't put things in order and have them in one PDF file in order. That would certainly make it easier.
Okay, so council, we have all the information in front of us. How would you like to proceed? Do you want to go through one by one? Is there any recommendations to start off with?
I mean, these are all organizations that we're aware of, organizations that have been on our ballot and have gotten voter approval before. It wouldn't be no different than the last year when we just put them on the ballot. The only concern that I have, and I didn't really think about it until people started talking about it, is the concern that they are all on there. That ship has already sailed for us. You know, we already made the decision to go this way. But when bringing it up to people outside of city council, there's been some concerns about lumping it all into one item on the ballot. And I just want to point it out there, you know, put it out there as a, you know, a complaint that I've received.
So Counselor, the reason why it was lumped together was because of the amount of space that it took up on the ballot.
I understand that. I'm just stating that I don't know if people were really aware of that, and it's partly right. Folks aren't really engaged with city council. So I didn't receive any complaints when we voted for it back in, you know, last year. So, or the year before. I can't remember when I think it whatever, when we voted on it. So I just wanted to point it out as there was some complaints about it. But regarding the actual stuff, I mean, we'd move it forward.
Counselor Hemrick, is your?
Yeah, thank you, Mayor. Yeah, as I recall some of the policy discussion about that, this is if somebody's really feels strongly about one of these organizations not being funded, then this would be the forum to show up and express some concern about that. I think one thing that I really like about the policy is that it really allows the voters to see who's requesting an increase in funding, which was a little bit harder to do before. So by lumping the items, the voters will be able to see, oh, these are all previously funded organizations that, and they're asking for level funding. And anyone not asking for level funding or requesting a modification from what council has approved would be listed separately on the ballot. But I can see both sides, but I kind of like that it does highlight potential increases, which no one has asked for an increase this year.
So historically.
I don't think
in order to go
anybody's
back on
asked for an increase in the past either.
Right, in order for them to stay on the ballot, it wasn't an increase unless it came before council for that modification. So we still had a,
If, as per our policy, and this has been the case for at least the last, well, for a decade or more, any increase requires petitioning. So,
in other words, in at least 15 years, there's been no increase for those unless they've gone out and petitioned for a placement on the ballot separately. So in essence, this hasn't changed who's on there unless they're dropping off.
yeah, and we did have, not this current year, but there was a change between last year and this year because Project Independence closed. So, that was one that dropped off. And
So I'm
So
just
can I,
going through and
can
I'm
I just
checking.
follow up?
Sure, go ahead.
Can I
Counselor.
follow up on the comment about, this is the time for people to come in? And I get that completely, but who wants to be the jerk that comes in and complains about Capstone getting money? Who wants to be that person that comes in and complains about Down Street getting money, Circle, Mosaic? Those are good organizations, and publicly to come in, all the organizations that are on there, I mean, I didn't see any that were bad, to come in and be that person, it's one thing to vote no on a ballot for them, and completely different to put yourself out there in a public forum saying, I disagree with, whatever it is that it could be, for example, BADC. Not everybody supports that organization or our partnership. That is, a concern that we have to think about going forward.
Oh, Counselor Wazizak?
Thank you. Yeah, I think Councilor Booton does definitely bring up a good point, like who wants to be the skunk at the party, who wants to come in and be the, curmudgeonly person railing against the partnership or Mosaic. And I don't doubt that Councilor Booton has received messages of concern of, this new policy and this is the way. I just think this is one, we're not going to please everybody. I think some people would prefer it, have it listed out individually. Others would rather see the lump sum. And so I hear that concern, but I think that this was a good rollout of this policy, and it's good to see. It's good to have the option to see these documents and to give the city some more, footing when it comes to the paper trail that we have for organizations to whom we're giving taxpayer money.
Yeah, and for clarity, I'm not saying that we don't move forward with the policy. I'm just stating that, there was some complaints about it, and they're valid complaints. And we'll see how it works for this year. And if people are really unhappy, they'll let us know, hopefully. And then if they don't like it, then we'll just go back to what we were doing before. But, I just wanted to point out that, there was some concern about it.
Yeah, I mean, the pluses and minuses, the pluses are that we have more room on our ballot now to put other items, things that wouldn't fit in the past. The negative is if they don't want to approve it, it's going to go down for all of them at once rather than individually. Councilor Hemmer?
Yeah, so to jump into the list of funding requests, and I would note also that the partnership and BADC are not on this list. They're direct funded through the budget.
But partnership is on this list.
Partnership.
Yeah, but only for the Heritage Festival.
Correct.
And that was going to be my question in that. With the Heritage Festival now having gone through a rebranding, should that still be listed as the Heritage Festival versus the was it called Fall, Autumn Fest, Fall Fest?
Those are two separate events.
Two separate events.
There was an email that came out actually today stating that they would be doing the Heritage Festival again this coming year.
Okay.
The question, though, that I probably will have for Tracy is, these are items that have been on the ballot in the past, and we didn't have the Heritage Festival. So what is being done with those funds that have been received in the past?
We, in FY '21, we did not pay the Barre Partnership with those funds because there was no Heritage Festival in '21. For the current fiscal year, I do believe that we made the payment because it went to support the Fall Festival that was being held in lieu of the Heritage Festival. So we did make the adjustment in 20 or in 21, but not in 22. So.
Councilor Booton?
And just for clarity about the BADC, I was thinking about our $40,000 or $20,000 truck wrap thing, you know, that they were on the ballot as one of those items.
Right.
Correct.
Not
That was
this
a
time.
separate
Which
item.
has been since taken off and is no longer being requested.
And I recall, did council follow its own policy in that instance and require the petition signatures?
Council.
No, we did not.
No. Council had a conversation to see if it was something that they wanted to add on, and council elected to do so. And it was before this policy was in place too. So
The one note that I would say is that, because I was working on the warning earlier today and realized that this list is not in alphabetical order. They have gotten out of alphabetical order because of name changes, because of various and sundry things. They will appear on the ballot in alphabetical order as is required. So just so you, in case you were worried about that, if you're one of those people that's that OCD like me.
So noting that, how would this appear on the ballot?
Just like that.
So it will still have all the names, but with one yes or no.
Correct. Yeah. So as you see on the last page there, it gives you what the question is. Shall the Barre City voters authorize the sum of $149,601 to be allocated to the following social service agencies and organizations as indicated? And it will list all of the organizations and their individual allocations.
Okay, so are there any other questions?
Okay, just one question I put before council. Do we think to be balanced and fair to outside organizations that the partnership and BADC should be listed here instead of the budget?
So I think that'd be a question for next year. I think we're at the spot this year where we've actually gone through the process. We've requested the information. These are the ones that have been on the ballot in previous years. I don't know. I don't object to.
Well, we could do that
having
with the library
conversation.
too.
Well, it would be any of them. And it would also, not just the library, but also the Community Justice Center, because that's another organization that's within our budget. So anything that we're funding for other organizations, it would make it consistent if it's all in one location. I just think for the process this year, you know, we've had those applications come in, but we'd want to give them notice if that's something council is looking to do in a future year.
Yeah.
Yeah, I would
no
say-
time like the present to do so.
Yeah. Sorry, Mr. Mayor. I was just gonna say that, like, you know, that's a conversation that we could have, but I agree that like this is the process and policy we've laid out for this year. So to continue how it is.
What are your thoughts on that? Since you have those four groups that are embedded within the budget.
Well, I mean, I don't have a personal right or privilege for those four groups. It's just, in my sense, that, in my mind, they're different organizations working in partnership with the city. So I don't see the need for the distinction. I would be comfortable leaving them right in the budget where they are. But again, that's a council prerogative. My recommendation would be to leave them in the budget.
So conversely, if there are organizations or items on this list that anyone feels should be put into the budget rather than through this process.
But my feeling is if it ain't broke, don't fix it. The four organizations that have been, that are in the general fund budget have been there historically. The organizations, the whatever it is, 24, 26,
22.
22, those have
Not that I've counted.
appeared over time. And in any given year, they may or may not be, they may or may not request funds, just like Project Independence that went out of business. And these are, frankly, these are requests above and beyond the budget, they're above and beyond the operating needs of the city. And that's why it's fair and appropriate to have the voters decide specifically if they want to allocate additional funds to worthy organizations that work to the benefit of the city, but they're above the operational needs of the city. So I would say leave it exactly the way it is.
Councilor Wazazan.
Yeah, I would just say, I tend to agree with Steve. But I also think another layer of this is that when the funding comes directly from the city budget, I feel that it gives the city government a seat at the table at those organizations in a way that a direct ballot initiative may not. Like the city being entitled to a seat on the board of trustees of the library on which I serve, and us being able to call in Cody Morrison from BADC and say, this is a priority of the city council. This is a project we'd like you to work on. Could you help us work on that? And I think that that's just I think it's a relationship difference that would come from that shift that I think we're well served on now. And I mean, like Waterbury, for example, treats the director of its public library like a department head. And they're, required to do certain reporting to the select board and things like that. So I tend to agree with Steve that I don't think what we have is broken right now. So I don't think a major overhaul is needed. If we want to have conversations about the funding of those organizations, to the level of their funding, whatever, again, council prerogative, but that would be my gut reaction to that.
Yeah, I would just offer in a respectful way, careful what you wish for, because if you are, and I understand where you're coming from, Counselor, but I think what's going to happen is you'll end up spreading the council way too thin. These are organizations that operate reliably on their own. I don't know that we've ever had any issue with any of them. I just think that if changing a relationship such that we have or want or require a seat at the table, I think you're going to get spread very thin, and you may regret that decision.
So I think Councilor Wazazak's point is the four that are currently in the budget. We've had multiple people that served on council that served on the Barre partnership. Councilor Hemrick was the most former member on BADC. We have Councilor Wazazak at the library, and Councilor Booten, I believe you're still on the Community Justice Center, or?
Actually, no. That's a.
Okay, Councilor Shambell is now on the Community Justice Center board. So we do have representation historically on those, whereas you look at the others and historically that hasn't been something that has happened. So I believe that's what you were mentioning, Councilor Waz, is that correct?
Yeah, that's what I meant. I didn't mean in any way to imply any sort of influence or, thumb on the scale in any way. I just think it's a different kind of relationship when it's a outside organization funded on a ballot initiative as opposed to one that works closely with our city government and is within our budget.
Councilor Booten?
Yeah, I will say that when you're getting money from people, there are strings attached. So if you're in the budget, yes, there's definitely those strings are attached. I know that the Justice Center, at least it did last year, have a specific portion in their bylaws for representation from City Council. And I don't know, and I think it's also written into the language for the library. And I assume that there's written language in both the partnership and BADC. I might be wrong. If not, then maybe we should have that conversation. I do know that we don't have anybody on BADC, and we technically don't have anybody on the partnership. Just pointing that out.
Both are noted. So anything else for discussion on the item before us?
Do you need a motion?
So for placing on the ballot,
I don't think that it's going to be included in the warning that will be approved. I'm going to have a draft copy of the warning available to review at next week's meeting, and then it'll be approved at the meeting on the 25th. So I don't think that that there's a motion necessary this evening. This was just to fulfill the policy that says that the council will get together and review. So that's all tonight was about. And it's good that since this is the first time we've been through this new process, it's good that we've had this discussion, that we've talked about changes we want to make in formatting, et cetera.
so with that noted, is there anything that we want to note about changes for the next process? Is there anything, council, like you had noted, Councilor Chambel, about the format, if it was the same across the board for an
I would
application?
like to see that.
So all the other supporting documents may come in and look a little bit different, but as long as the applications are similar.
Yeah, what I would suggest is that I change the sort of cover memo so that it gives instructions, and that the instructions say, please please answer the narrative questions in the order that they're written. Please provide the materials in this order, and please put some kind of header on each document that says, this is our profit and loss statement. This is our, budget to actuals. This is our, whatever, so that so that it's clear what the documents are going forward, and then ask them to scan them in one PDF so that they're all in order, instead of, some of them, there's 8, 9 documents. So, yeah. If that makes sense, then that's what I'll do, is I'll just adjust the instructions. And see how many of them actually read it.
I'd say 10%.
Well, I will say that, one of the challenges, and this has been going on for 14 years, is, that we require that they submit by the first business day in the calendar year. And I usually find myself the week before sending out the 3rd reminder email. And every year I'm like, well, I'm not going to do it this year, but I also have run a nonprofit, so I know what it's like to be on the other side of the coin. So
Come 2 years from now, that may be a different story.
exactly.
Okay, so any further discussion? Okay, hearing and seeing none, I'd look for a motion to adjourn the special city council meeting.
So moved.
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed, nay? Okay, we will be adjourned until 7 o'clock for our regularly scheduled program. Thank you.
Look how fast we were.
I'm not going to stop the recording, I don't think, because I
You
think
pause
if
it?
I guess I can pause.
Call it a 2-minute warning. Yeah, the other thing that was kind of cool about my flight was when you're going from Phoenix to Philadelphia, it's free to have Wi-Fi in the plane. So I was able to watch football the entire time. Yeah, every channel was available. You just went through, switched between games. The guy next to me had his up on a screen. I had mine. So,
I meant to ask Lucas, where were you that you saw Terry Bradshaw?
So it was the American Corrections Association conference. They had a winter conference and he was the guest speaker. Yeah, he walked right
Okay.
by me. You know. He was a great storyteller for sure.
He
Oh, I'm
gives
sure.
that image.
Well, and then it's funny because he was there speaking on Friday, and then Sunday I'm watching him as part of the broadcast.
Yeah.
And NFL Sunday. And then, you know, my girlfriend's son, he's 17 and he's a big Steelers fan. So I was like, guess who this is? And he was like, he looks familiar. It's like, yeah, it's Terry Bradshaw. He only won 4 Super Bowls for you. But then that's dating my age versus his.
Probably like me recognized him from like movies that he was in, because I don't watch football.
So council, it is 7 o'clock. I will call our regular meeting to order, noting that we did have a special meeting earlier. So since we are in order, are there any adjustments to the agenda?
Yes. I would like to pull out the housing, the ARPA housing plan from the ARPA discussion and have that before we have the ARPA workshop.
Okay, so note that ARPA housing, oh, it wouldn't even be called ARPA, it'd just be a housing discussion.
Yes.
And that would go before the 9A item of the ARPA funding process. Is there any other adjustments to the agenda? Hearing and seeing none, is there a motion to approve the consent agenda?
So moved.
Second.
Discussion?
We've got a couple of licenses that are included for Gusto's over here on Prospect Street. Their food establishment license and their entertainment license are included in the consent agenda.
No concerns there. All those in favor, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
And opposed, nay. Any abstentions? Seeing none. Moving on to the city clerk and treasurer's report. Carol?
That
Hello.
wasn't a liquor license, was it?
No,
Oh, okay. Okay. Just want to make sure when you paused on the abstention thing, I'm like, whoa, wait,
Yeah, I
what?
know. I just wanted to double check.
so a couple continuing reminders, the town meeting information is available on the website with regards to what offices are up for election. The consent of candidate forms, the nominating petitions, various and sundry bits and pieces. The deadline for nominating petitions is January 24th, which is 2 weeks from yesterday. I will say that the legislature has a bill in front of it, Senate Bill 222, 223, which would eliminate the need for nominating petitions this year, similar to what happened last year. In which case anybody interested in running for any of the offices would need to submit a consent of candidate form by January 24th, but they wouldn't need to do the nominating petitions, but that hasn't been passed yet. They're hoping to pass it by the end of this week, but I would suggest that if you're interested in running, that you don't stop collecting signatures quite yet. I would wait until it had actually passed and been signed by the governor. The other legislative changes that are up, Senate Bill 172, which was also emergency election procedures and was approved last week, but still hasn't been signed by the governor. Though it is expected to be, but towns are chomping at the bit, because it would allow towns to move their town meeting day elections, particularly those who do floor votes, to move them later in the year so that we're either away from the current surge in COVID cases, or they have an opportunity to hold their town meeting outdoors. It would also allow towns to move from a floor vote to Australian ballot. So that has passed. We're just waiting on the governor's signature. The 223, which I had mentioned before, in addition to the nominating petitions, it also will make some changes surrounding commingling of ballots. Unfortunately, at least at the moment, it doesn't include language that would address commingling of the Central Vermont Career Center ballots that are part of what we're dealing with here in Barre City for the Spalding Tech Center, the creation vote for the Career Center. So that probably will continue to need to happen. So, and then they're also looking at Senate Bill 222, which is changes to the open meeting law, which would put in place several of the same emergency measures that they had last year, probably the most significant one being that it would allow fully virtual meetings again, without the need for a physical location. That is anticipated to pass this week, and so might be in effect as early as next week, but that's still being worked on. And lastly, the 169, Senate 169, I think. You may recall from the TIF audit that the city of Barre overpaid money into the education fund, and we had to go to the legislature for the remedy to that. So a bill has been drafted, and actually I'm scheduled to testify with Senate Finance tomorrow on that refund. So we're hoping that that moves forward. I mentioned last week that we're going to do postcards to all active voter households, reminding them and encouraging them to vote absentee and request their ballots. So they went in the mail today. And just to make sure that it's formal, I am running for re-election this year, so I'll be on the ballot, and it is my intention that this would be my last 2-year term. So that's it.
Thank you. And thank you for all your years of service. Just one note for S222, if that does go into effect, that's something that council, I just want to make sure you're aware of. It might pop on the agenda for a discussion point to see if we want to allow for this body to meet fully remotely. I don't know what the future holds, and it would also apply to other bodies of the city. So for those committees to be able to meet fully remotely as well. Councilor Hemmer?
Thank you, Mayor Herring, and thanks, Clerk Dawes. I just wanted to tune you into 2 bills that I saw today. They were House bills, and I'm forgetting their numbers, but Representative Marcotte and Kimball have a TIF bill that would freeze, that would disallow any tax stabilization within a TIF district. And that would require the municipality to make up the ed portion.
Which we already do.
Assess, so that's already in.
For tax stabilized properties.
Okay, this would be for any parcel within a TIF district that is, that has an assessment decrease, I read, that the municipality would have to make that up, that increment. So if there was a decrease in value of any property, there's a new provision. So just tuning you into that.
Yeah.
The other bill was from Representative Ansel related to local option tax, and she has a proposal to redistribute all the local option taxes through a central collection thing. So it would could potentially affect any municipality it has a local option tax in place. So just heads up.
Can you elaborate on that comment?
It's centralized, meaning it goes through the state.
Yeah.
Because
off
we
the
already
top of my
do
head,
that.
There would be I think it's called a local option equalization in the bill. Is that, do I have that right, Carol? Or did
No,
you
but
see this
it
bill?
wouldn't surprise me.
Okay, yeah. And it's designed to be revenue neutral. But I can send Carol the bill numbers and Steve, and you can look at it yourself.
The way the local option tax works right now is that it's a 70-30 split. 70% comes back to the municipalities where the money is collected. And the 30% actually goes into the pilot pocket, goes into the pilot fund for the state. And so ultimately is then spread around the state based on their pilot formula. So I've always thought of that as being, we're getting the 70% back, and then we're also, by increasing the pilot, we're getting an increase in the amount of pilot money also. So it comes back to us in two ways. I'll look
But
into
if they
those
were to
bills.
increase that, that would mean that it would probably benefit Montpelier a lot more than us.
Well, I'll have to read the bill and see what the intention is.
So any questions for the clerk or treasurer? Okay, hearing and seeing none, moving on to nothing for liquor control.
Nope.
Clerk. And then moving on to the city manager.
Yeah, nothing more than what I had in my written report.
Okay, any questions for the manager? Hearing and seeing none. Anything for visitors and communications? Oop. Vern, did I see your hand go up?
No.
No, okay. Okay, so hearing and seeing none, moving on to, there is no old business. So item 9, it would be a new A, or however we'd have it listed. This is a discussion on housing. Councilor Stockwell.
I want an opportunity for the council to discuss the housing proposal just because it's so detailed and would have such an impact. And do people want like a 2-minute overview?
Feel free, give an overview, because there's people that are on the Zoom that most likely have not seen or know what we're talking about. So feel free,
Proposal
go ahead.
is to create 125 homes over the next 5 years. The point of that would be to increase the grand list, increase the population, and create more cost-effective services. There are 6 strategies to accomplish that goal, which will probably change and will probably involve and will probably add more. But the basic strategies are that we would coordinate with the housing task force that's part of All in Barre. We would have a revolving housing fund. We'd have tax stabilization, which we've that's already accomplished. We would look at, we'd survey infill possibilities, look at neighborhood designations, and consider zoning. And I think there's one more. And convene developers and the nonprofits to say, what are the barriers? How can we best do this? So it looks at a variety of models, and that's the 2-minute overview.
So is there anybody that has questions about a housing program or trying to implement one that is supported through, it would be ARPA funds in this program, but basically a housing program that for one would help increase the grand list. So it's one thing that we've always discussed here at council is what are the ways to try to steady that tax rate? Because we know that it has gone up. It's higher here than in many municipalities for different reasons. And I guess if anybody has any questions on how housing would affect the tax rate.
I mean, are you looking for what?
Just, do you have any questions on such a program?
I mean, I think it's laid out quite well. I mean, I have comments.
Sure, go ahead.
I mean, I like the idea of, modifying the zoning. I like, the the special assessment portion, I'm not overly excited about putting a revolving loan fund in. You know, there is some conversation that I've heard coming from the state level about a lot of money coming down for housing. And I'm not sure if taking $200,000 from the ARPA and putting it into housing is something that we should be doing, but I'm all by myself. So that's what it is.
So Councillor Booton, I think the intent of some of these funds versus the funds for the housing programs at the state level is that they cover different niches. For example, if it was an infill program, there isn't funds currently to do the work that's needed to split, say, a property in two in order to do the development on one side versus the other. What we have seen at the state level would be, I think it's 30,000 per unit for rental property, for example, to make those come back into service. So the intent is that these would cover different areas of funding that is currently not in place at the state level. Councillor Wazizak?
Yeah, so I really appreciate all the work that has clearly gone into this. And there is definitely a lot to digest working through this document. But I do, I understand what Councillor Booton is saying. When, you know, basically, if there is state money available to accomplish some of the goals laid out in this plan, we should absolutely take advantage of that. But, you know, I do think that with housing is one of our biggest needs, and this is the ARPA funds are a huge opportunity for the city. So I think that I like the idea of an aggressive approach to really accomplish some of the goal. We all know that we need more housing. We all know that we need to grow the grand list, and we all know that we need to bring more population into Barre. And I think that some of the things laid out in this plan are a really great way to achieve that.
Bernadette, I see your hand is up.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I wonder, when you were talking about bringing together nonprofits and contractors, whatever, developers, Sam, who would own these properties, and would they only be rental properties, or would we be developing home ownership? Because right now we're at 50% rental property. So I would like to see that some of that money could go into developing more private home ownership, or landlords that were living in Barre. Thank you.
Yes, the model encourages a variety of housing. Some of it is for home ownership, some of it is condos, some of it is cooperative living, some of it is apartments. So it would be, and the revolving housing fund would give us a lot of flexibility. And as you may be familiar with state grants, they're not necessarily flexible items if we really want to encourage housing and home ownership for people who traditionally, that's not an option for them.
Councillor Hemrick?
Yeah, and one thing that I would add is that we built this proposal around some common understandings. And one of those understandings is that opportunities for ownership and equity building is more limited in Barre City than other Vermont communities. Home ownership in the city, which we know nationally is closely linked to wealth building and generational wealth transfer, is 35% below the Vermont average. And 47% of households own their homes in Barre City compared to 82% for the state as a whole. And we know that citizen reports indicate that access to federally underwritten conventional financing by Fannie Mae or Freddie Mac can be unavailable for a lot of homes with legacy hazards like knob and tube electrical, or asbestos or lead paint. And those types of things can limit the pool of potential buyers to only investor landlords and have the effect of further limiting ownership opportunities in the city. And Councilor Booton's right in that, there are a lot of state programs that can address this. And the mayor's also right is that some of them are very, very targeted or have a narrow audience, such as a very low income resident trying to stay in their home. But sometimes the gap between the income of a household, which may be a moderate income household, and the needs of the structure can be a pretty wide gap, and there aren't state programs to help fill those gaps. And that's where a revolving loan fund, like a low interest revolving loan fund, or even potentially some grants, is the city making investment in its own grand list. And its future financial sustainability and perspective, maintaining that perspective ownership opportunity. And there are a lot of creative solutions out there, and I think we really have to get creative and not get too bogged down in programmatic details, and recognition that this council has said we're willing to support in this draft proposed budget, allocating staff time to help run these programs up to $100,000, not necessarily just for housing. It could be infrastructure, it could be IT, it could be, it sounds like record digitization, even more flexibility now than before. But this will be an iterative process, and one where a staff expert working on these projects can say, these are the lowest cost, highest impact projects. They're going to make the biggest difference. And really what I think is important about this document is that it sets a clear vision and goals. The goals that Sam just went over, to grow the grand list, to grow population, and to ease inequities of poverty and discrimination and housing insecurity. So there's a good vision here, and I think it's a project that would be adaptive. But we did put out a lot of ideas on the table for consideration in the coming years.
Yeah, one thing to add, the strategy 6, which was to convene the developers, lenders, and nonprofits. Part of that is when you're thinking about empty parcels that are there right now, or if you're trying to develop on a parcel that's already within the city. Two things there. If you reach out to a developer, they're going to be able to tell you a little bit different about, are you connecting to a water and sewer line that is already existing versus in another part of the state, you don't have that infrastructure. So you would have to see if you need a mound system or what you're doing for drilling a well in those areas. So they might be able to talk to the prospective owner of a home in one of those locations to see what the actual needs are. So we need to be able to understand more of what are the barriers. And I think convening those groups together are going to let us understand more from that development standpoint, from a lending standpoint. If, there are programs out there for first-time homeowners for a down payment assistance, or you have that PMI insurance, and that always is an additional amount that people can't really afford. So as we start having the conversation of how would this best be implemented, we need those players at the table to tell us what those barriers are in order to make sure that we're covering all those areas. Councillor Wazizak, your hand is up.
Oh, no, sorry. It was just still up, but I agree with everything you just said, Mr. Mayor.
One of the things that I want to just point out, that we were talking about the tax rate and the impacts on the tax rate. And I just want to note that the citywide reassessment that we'll be doing over the next couple of years will have a huge impact on the tax rate, just to create a more equitable value across the city will lower the tax rate considerably. And that is something I want to make sure that we don't lose sight of that. So.
Yep. And also, and I think you've noted this in the past, Carol, is the tax rate is based on the revenues and expenditures. So if we look at the overall spending of the city, the tax rate is going to be reflective of anything that we make adjustments on, say, the expenditure side. So if we raise expenditures by 10%, the tax rate might not even go down. But I don't think we'd be looking to do that. If we're moderating what we're actually doing on the expenditure side, that also will have an impact on that overall tax rate, which I think, that's what we do during that.
Right. A lot of people mistakenly think that, if we add $5 million to $50 million to the grand list times the tax rate, that gives us this much more money. And that's not the way tax rates work. tax rates are, tied to, it's a math equation between the value of all of the property in the city and the budget as adopted by the voters, divided into the one into the other, and that creates the tax rate. If the assessed value citywide goes up, the tax rate goes down because it all has to equal the budget as approved, regardless of what the other numbers are. What growing the grand list does is it gives you more bang for the buck, as it were. So the same tax rate that you had 5 years ago is raising more money. So it gives you can continue, you can add 10% a year to your budget with no increase across your tax rates. So that's what growing the grand list does for you.
So any other questions or comments? Well, hearing and seeing none, then I think now we can jump into what was warned as item 9A. And this is the discussion on the ARPA funding process and is quoted as a workshop and under the city manager. Steve?
Yeah, I called it a workshop, I think quite some time ago. The council, I think I made the recommendation and the council agreed that it'd be worthwhile and productive to be able to have a council session that was pretty much devoted to just ARPA and not all the usual business. And I chose to call it a workshop. I presented in the packet, a discussion outline, and the idea was to help focus the discussion. And the intent is to keep it on I guess I'd say a holistic level or programmatic level and not get into the weeds yet in terms of trying to decide which projects to possibly fund or whatever. That'll be coming down the road, and I don't think we're ready for that yet, and I don't think we will be until the council makes some decisions about programmatic approach. So I identified the objectives as determine the process for the identification, selection, and approval of ARPA-funded projects using ARPA funds. Review the current allocations and pending requests queue. Decide target global allocations of ARPA funds in terms of how much of the 2.5 million might go to municipal infrastructure projects, how much might go to community investments, the housing program, for instance, and then determine the project's identification, eligibility, and approval process. So really trying to keep it at a general level. To that end, the next two items I've said, review the current allocations and pending request queue. I'll take them one at a time. And when I said review, I really meant only to orient you to those lists. We'd be happy to entertain any discussion you might have, but these lists still aren't at a point where they've been fully vetted. It's really capturing the suggestions or proposals or requests, if you will, that have come, either had been discussions had at the council level or come through the manager's office. So the first one is the updated funding request log, ARPA funding request log. And this is updated from what was in your packet. And so it's expanded. And if you've had a chance to look at it, you'll see that with what we've added, just from staff suggestions, the total pending queue, if you will, is about $4.2 million against the $2.5 million ARPA allocation. I think, as we've said for a while, and I think as the council appreciates, there's far more projects to consider than there are funds available. Goes back to what Carol was saying a minute ago about $1 million worth of grant applications for $300,000 worth of funding. It's the same idea. I think among other things, that what this helps show is maybe the significance of the council making a decision about how to globally allocate the $2.5 million. And we'll do that later on in the list. So I'll answer any questions or move on to the next one.
So just one question,
Yeah.
because council has basically allocated an amount to be used for positions from the ARPA funding.
Yep.
Is that something, I'd say that we'd probably want to have that included as part of this list.
Good catch.
So any other questions from or comments from council? Okay. Feel free to move forward once
Yep.
you're done with your list.
And then the other list is the one that I published, issued late this afternoon from, I got received from Bill Ahern, our Director of Public Works. And again, this goes more to, I think, the request for having a list of capital improvement. I guess I'd rather call it really capital infrastructure projects. Again, this is a first draft. I would consider this a work in progress. I think it certainly needs vetting and refinement, but what this, I don't know, Bill, if you even have a subtotal on this. And it's clear that a lot of our items on here don't even have funding amounts, but I think this helps begin to bring some focus or definition to the global number that's been thrown out a number of times. We have $40 million worth of infrastructure needs. I think that's certainly a global number. It's not one that has any kind of substantive analysis, but I think as you go through this list, you'll see you begin to get a picture of what those city needs are. Clearly, we'll probably barely touch this list with what we've already got on the ARPA funding request log, and there might be some overlap between the ARPA log and this. I haven't had a chance to look at it closely enough, but the intent of this was to begin to bring some focus to the council's request of, so what are all of the infrastructure needs of the city that are out there for the next 20, 30, 40 years? And this does that. This starts that process. So, and Bill is here. We'd be happy to answer any questions you might have about that. But again, the intent of tonight, at least from my perspective, is not to get into a deep dive on any of these lists, but to get you oriented to them and indicate that we will be refining these as we move ahead.
So 2 questions just to start us off. This is a good start, and I thank you, Bill, for pulling this together. One is we're talking about different funding mechanisms for these items. One would be ARPA. We're also having the conversation next week that includes the possibility of adding sales to our local options. And both are pieces of the pie, right? So we're hoping that with the infrastructure bill that was passed, we'd be able to use some of these funds to leverage more funds. So I guess asking partly for this conversation, partly for a future one is, what do you see the breakout being if the council was able to move forward with ARPA in a part of this, but also using those, call it $750,000 a year that the local options would bring?
I'll take a stab, Bill, and you can add in. Again, there are not having had a chance to cross-check the ARPA list against this one. You'll see on the ARPA list, there's the infrastructure category, which has the water and sewer division capital plans. Between those, it's about $1,100,000. I don't know at this point whether those are on this list or not. I think what I would caution, if you will, that the ARPA, there's sufficient need to define projects for the ARPA list that will certainly consume the ARPA funds and probably don't. And I got to be guarded when I say this, but may not make a significant dent in this capital improvements list. I doubt that it will. Where the funding for the capital improvements list will likely come from is, if we were, part of it's going to be either general fund money or money's built into the water and wastewater enterprise budgets funds. Money that comes from grants that we're able to pursue on a project by project basis, which are you can't predict at this point in time. And frankly, you take advantage of grant funding. It's really a strategic process for capital projects like this. What we need to do, frankly, it's what we're doing with the North Main Street Pump Station, for instance. We've gotten funding assistance to proceed with the design. And as we're getting the design done, we are reaching out to get additional funding assistance for the construction. And you can't be successful in getting funding dollars until you've got the hard design done. So many of these projects might be, even the earliest ones could take 2 to 3 years to get to a construction phase, because you've got to get through the planning, the design, and then once you've got the design done, submit for a grant and look for the opportunities for the grant funding, and then submit, and then hope you're successful. Probably one of the biggest ones here is the DPW campus replacement. We've got a range there of $5 to $8 million. Hopefully we'll know what that number will be within the next 3 to 4 months as that process is completed. At least a programmatic number. We'll be able to refine that number some, but then we've got to decide how to advance that project. Is it design build? Is it design bid? There are advantages and disadvantages to each project, each process. But the easier parts to accomplish are the planning and the design, because while they're not necessarily inexpensive, they are a lot less costly than the actual physical project itself. So the ability to implement any of these is probably a function of being ready for and the ability to apply successfully for grants that will help underwrite the costs. And then the third thing that I didn't mention was, and there'll likely be bond votes for financing part of these larger projects. So it's a combination of funding sources that can't be specifically identified until we are further down the road on each project. I think the takeaway here is that whether this list adds up to 40 million or not, we're not saying that that's $40 million that has to be spent by the city. Maybe it's 20 million, maybe it's 30 million, but the ability to advance a lot of these is based on the ability to get grants and to help subsidize the cost.
And the second question is really more about we have dams on here a little bit, and the Dix Reservoir, for example, we have that main line and we have a secondary line that come in. Some of it's been exposed over time. And so if you have an exposed pipe, it's the main water that enters the city. That's a big risk. I don't know if I saw that on here. Was that pipe?
So step back just for a moment. What I've tried to create.
And can you come up for the microphone, just because I'm not sure if everybody on the TV can hear.
Thank you.
So for the record, my name is William Ahern. I'm the Director of Public Works for the City of Barre. And I presented through the city manager a needs list, and it's incomplete because it hasn't actually worked through some needs that I know we have, and we are right now working on reconciling. I'm going to characterize it as this needs list with the three draft capital plans that we supplied earlier. One was the water program, one was the sewer program, and one was the streets program. And so in this particular needs list, you'll see, for instance, I think there's more than 20 4-inch water line listings by street. And out of that list of 20, if we were to look in the water program, you'll see only perhaps between 13 and 15 were to be addressed in the next 5 years. And so what I need the council to recognize is that as we work through these pieces, one of the most important things that the council can bring to the issue is the priority setting. And so if I have 25 streets that are 4-inch, have another 30 to 40 streets that are 6-inch, and the standards that we're building today are 8-inch, which are most important? And so that's just the water mains issue. The same thing is true in the sewer lines. The same thing is true if we look at the water treatment plant. And we've thrown some relatively significant but large or big picture issues. For instance, source protection. We have over 3,000 feet of a town highway that is within 8 to 35 feet of our water source. Fuel trucks run along that. What would happen if a fuel truck ripped open into our reservoir? And so there are all these, literally, there's a cloud of opportunity that are things we can solve. We haven't had a fuel truck in the reservoir in 80-something years. There's no reason to believe it's going to happen tomorrow. What are the right mitigation strategies? And so what we've tried to do is to create a needs list to give you a kind of a general description. The next piece to that, and we've started to do that, is we've given you some draft capital plans. I can tell you that Eli was going through this very afternoon and working off of what we had presented in those 3 separate capital plans and putting asterisks on this needs list to say what's already under consideration in the pipeline and what's left. And what will come out of that is an opportunity for you to say, this is what the community needs. And so we could well see a change in each of those 5-year plans, because as you look at it, you see it through a different lens. And truly that's your role, is to decide what does the community have to have first. What I haven't presented to you before is kind of that, how big is this cloud of opportunity? And what will we do about it? So and I apologize that it's incomplete, but even if it were complete, the next piece that you really need from your staff is to say, here's how it fits together. The managers really made clear that we're talking about the total value of the improvements that need to be made, not the direct cost to the city. And so the North Main Street Pump Station is a great example. The community bonded for it. And as we've gotten closer to trying to build that, we've worked aggressively to find other monetary sources. And through the manager's concerted efforts with other parties, we're looking at more than $250,000 worth of grants that at the time we put the bond forward, we did not know would be present. And so that will happen as we go through all these projects. But what we tried to do is to present you with this needs list, and then to try to put together a tentative schedule. As you look at that, you'll see that there are a fair number of projects. I'm avoiding the use of the word large. A fair number of projects that are put out to 2030 outside our planning horizon in the 5 years, because I don't know where they will fit. And truly, you need an opportunity to look at them and say, this is how we would prioritize them. Again, would they be 2027? Would they be 2040? At this point, right now, just getting our arms around what the scope of the needs are and being able to find a way to compare those needs and then to set priorities for them is where we are. And honestly, I would tell you it will be a intense process because it's a difficult process to weigh that many different factors.
Councillor Stockwell?
So is this capital improvement plan organized by sense of priority? It's just,
No, it isn't. It was basically we tried to organize it by function that DPW delivers. And for instance, on the wastewater side, we haven't completed that. Even though we know there are several millions of dollars of work that's needed across the plant as it sits. Rather than putting that into this, we are using a consultant now to define what those specific scope of upgrades will be. And so, yes, we can still give you numbers and an estimate of how it will change. We're in an active planning process to define more clearly how and when it will change. But this is really just a listing. We've tried to develop it by function. We haven't dealt with priority setting across functions. And we will get to that point. And likely it's something that would be not a fixed decision, but one that the council will look at, consider, and make revisions to as time goes on. So
what's the relationship between the plant? So the ARPA requests are very specific. And did you pull something out of here?
yes.
And you did that because?
So specifically in the ARPA requests, there are, I think, 4 areas or perhaps 5 areas that we asked for. One is related to the water capital planning process and what we had put forward already to be funded from the enterprise fund water revenues was a program of some upgrades on 4-inch pipes. We also had 2 years worth of the sewer programs improvements in the ARPA request. And those 2 amounts, and I think we listed the water program at $500,000 a year in the ARPA request. The full water program request is $750,000. So we're not trying to diminish it altogether. We're trying to take about 2/3 of that and say, this is an important long-term change to the community. Let's fund this improvement within the city only in the water system with ARPA funds. Let's look at the sewer side. And on the sewer side, our revenues have not met expenses. And so we have less available funding for sewer projects. Let's fully fund the sewer program for 2 years out of ARPA funds. And then there were 3 supplemental requests that were added. One was related to a radio communication system. And I don't want to get too far into the weeds, and I'm afraid I'm about to, so I'll kind of stop. One was a radio system. One was a data management system to do GIS work. And I just lost the 3rd one right out of my mind.
The
Water meter?
DPW communications.
Water meters.
Yep.
So we are losing our water meter reader effective January 14th. Person has resigned their position to take a higher paying job in the private sector. And I'm in a position where we've had a specific staff function and the person's leaving to make a technology leap. And so right now, Roughly 70% of our meters, we don't have to go into the home. We're able to read them by walking up to the house and placing a device against an outside meter device. The state-of-the-art meter right now is something that you drive down the street and you can use Bluetooth, and you don't go in the house. You don't have to get closer than 300 feet to the house. And you can pull that reading in 7 to 15 seconds. And so something that takes us 2 months to 2.5 months to do, similar sized communities do in 2 weeks. But it requires making that capital investment for water meters. And we're not changing the whole meter in some cases. All we're changing is the top part, the head, that gives us the reading. If we did that in the near term, we were able to convert that labor savings not into reduced expenditures, but into other priority activities within the water program that we're not doing. And so that's why that one-time opportunity was looked at. We know that we want to do this. It's got to be done in the next 15 years. We're presented this unique opportunity with an outside source of funding that could make it happen that wouldn't affect our water rates. And so that was the third request.
So trying to pair that with additional housing conversations, if that technology difference was made now, it would then be implemented for any new home going forward. They would have to have that. That's just, it would be a standard.
Right.
And I'm assuming that that would be part of any policy revision that you'd be bringing forward to council too, so that we would make sure that we're not looking to install old devices that are eventually going to be replaced anyway. It must meet this minimum standard.
That's absolutely correct. That from this point forward, that would be the only technology that the city installed or allowed to be installed in the town.
So other questions? Councilor Booton?
Heck, okay, there we go. So yeah, I mean, this is nice to see the big picture of the issues that we have at hand. You know what I would like to see is for a list created by staff, because you guys are the ones that are on the ground. You know what the problems are. You know what is the most important within our city. I would like to see a list that covers $2.5 million worth of improvements or whatever in priority for a priority list. And then we could make a decision on whether or not we want to move forward with those, or, you know, reprioritize them with some of the other items that are here. I think that, you know, and it's my personal opinion that we should take what you guys have for your priorities, because you guys do know what's going on and are certainly have more of a pulse on it. Take into account, you know, the biggest bang for the buck and the most important issue at hand. That's the list that I would like to see, and then I would like for us to make a decision as to whether or not we want to implement that.
Counselor, I think we may get into that discussion at a high level when we actually get to the next item. I think, and if we're ready, well, go, Counselor. Let me. I think we're going to get into that discussion when we get into the next item on the agenda, but I didn't mean to cut off questions.
Councilor Hammer. Mayor Herring. One, I'm just so pleased by all the work that is going into trying to listing out our capital needs. And it's starting to come into focus for me. What's out there in terms of what do we want to get done in the next 10 years, maybe even some 20-year items here. From streets, Department of Public Works, water, sewer, facilities, although we don't have any facilities list yet. And we know earlier we had heard about needs at the pool, or for. We know there's quite a few needs here at City Hall.
There's a number of facilities items on the ARPA list
Yeah,
and some incorporated in the, but I'm not going to suggest it's comprehensive.
but and I think this whole exercise would be a lot easier if we did have a finalized plan, capital program and budget, because we could then just start looking at what are the top 10 items that have been vetted by staff in terms of priority, and then have had board, committee, commission input, and then some council prioritization with citizen input involved. But this is all moving in that direction, and I think it's so positive to see that happening. One thing that I'm a little bit worried about is when we start to mix the water wastewater enterprise items, like $800,000 in metering for water wastewater enterprise, and how that would be shared among both our town customers and the city customers in the enterprise. And would the town be putting in a commensurate investment into the enterprise with their ARPA funds, or would this just be another subsidy from the city to the benefit of people who are not putting money on the table?
So again, I think that the wonderful thing about these conversations is that people highlight opportunities. So we've talked about using city ARPA funds, and it hadn't occurred to me, but it is not at all unreasonable, because our relationship with the town allows the city to bill the town for the expenses associated with those accounts. And so the expense associated with upgrading their meter heads to meet our new standard could well be a Barrytown ARPA eligible function. And the key piece to that comes down to the city articulating that the city's ARPA funds would only be used for city meters, and that the town would be expected to pony up. Or if the town elected not to, the residents would carry that cost to pay for the upgrade of their meter. And that is actually what our intermunicipal agreement would allow us to do. And I can tell you honestly, when I was developing these costs, I just looked at the total meter count. And so splitting the meter count between city and town is actually a prudent thing to do. And to not assume those costs, but to hold them to the town instead of the city is a prudent and good idea. It's one I hadn't thought of when I presented you these numbers. But the benefit of the conversation is that we get those ideas out there.
In terms of bringing the Department of Public Works wide needs, streets needs, water, sewer, buildings and facilities, and equipment, what does a timeline look like for a comprehensive capital budget and program that would bring those pieces together, have a description of each project, have prioritization, and then allow some a clear like spending priority?
Yeah, fair question. If you remember, you folks authorized me to prepare an RFP for a capital improvements consultant back in, I think, October. And the fact of the matter is I've made no progress on that at this point in time. So the reason we got there is that and I think the staff felt that we didn't have the resources to focus on just pulling that plan together. I think we've made some progress. You know, I always hate that question of how long do you think? Because in a setting like this, reacting to a spontaneous question, I always try to make realistic responses and good faith responses. And those are those are most often made thinking about, well, if I could reasonably, if I or we or the staff could reasonably focus on those, we could get that done in X amount of time. And then tomorrow, something comes in out of the woodwork that just whatever. So I would say if we were to, I guess I would say 3 to 6 months, and that's, I know that's a long time. But to develop the capital improvements documents, whether we still try to do it ourselves or have a consultant do it, I mean, it's a concerted effort. There's not one person on the staff who could pull that list together themselves. It really is a team effort because we have so many departments involved. One person can be the manager of formatting and preparing a list and so on and so forth. But it's not one individual's ability to identify everything. So it's a fairly comprehensive project. So understanding that it really is a high priority among all the other high priorities we have. The best answer I could give you would be 3 to 6 months, and try to get it closer to 3 than 6. But and I try to give conservative answers, meaning try to be able to beat the expectations rather than miss them. But that's the response I would give.
So, and I'll take it one step further of, we have what we're proposing, most likely for charter change language that would say that it would have to be there by a certain date anyway. So as long as we can get that RFP out so that we have the bids for the consultant, that person would be in place. And hopefully those are the stepping stones that would make sure that it's in time by that. Hopefully it would be charter language to come up.
No, I would hope it would be in well before that.
If I could add an element that pulls this together, and that is one of the key pieces is, and Steve's got the staff assigned to do this, is to describe those needs in a meaningful way. What are the projects? What's profoundly difficult is trying to make decisions between how do we choose how much to put into, say, improvements in water versus making a decision to make a playground more safe. And by using a consultant to look at all those different venues, and the consultant is an honest broker, they aren't from within the program, they don't have a favorite program. The consultant can provide you a system to make your assessments within. And that's the huge value of the consultant is every one of the department heads can tell you how great their needs are and why they're the right ones. But having someone who looks at all of those different points of view and says, this is how you parse this question of what's important, and here's how I rank them for you, gives the council the insight to make those decisions. And so that's the beauty of the consultant model that we're pursuing is it doesn't change what the projects would be described as, which comes from the staff, but it takes an outside point of view and brings that point of view to help you look at them and say, yeah, as much as we'd like to have water meter heads, boy, we really have to deal with the liability over in that park. And if we have to wait another 6 months on water meter heads, we take care of that liability. That's hypothetical, folks. You don't really have to do that.
One of the roles of the manager is to help make some of those decisions in terms of competing needs between staff and whatever. So that's one of the roles that I try to play. I think I have played, and the successor manager will do the same thing. But that would be part and parcel of whatever a consultant would bring to the process. And ultimately, the deciders are going to be the council. We as a staff and as a team try to make the best recommendations we can to the council, but often many of them are judgment calls. And we understand that the judgment of the staff may not always align with what the council thinks are the priorities and so on. So it's entirely the council's prerogative to ultimately make final decisions about the priorities, with the caveat that if a grant opportunity comes along today that you didn't see yesterday, you might, I would leave a higher priority project on the table if I knew I could get grant funding for project number 3 and get that done and move it. So there's always that kind of yin and yang in terms of making decisions.
Yeah, the other thing that's not on this list, and I'm glad you brought up the water meters as an example, is if it takes that staff time, not 2 months, but 2 weeks, there's a cost there that you have in savings. And we're not looking at that here, but that could potentially say this is a free project. The overall cost of the project basically pays for itself within the program without grant funding. So those are the types of things that I think a consultant would point out too.
Well, the ability to also to perhaps reallocate, we'll talk this position specifically, but it could apply to any where you can bring cost savings to the position. But the ability to realign or refocus the duties of that particular position as a result of cost savings or efficiencies that are brought to the manner in which we go about the work, allows that staff person to go to other assignments and address operational needs that aren't being met right now because there's nobody to do it.
So a couple other quick points, then I'll turn over for Councilor Wazizak, is just the first item on this list for the new facility. If you think of a $5 to $8 million facility, that's just a ballpark right now. But our ARPA funds are only 2.5 million. So you're thinking of 2 to 3 times the amount of the ARPA funds for just one item on this list. And so when you multiply that across to all of the needs, that's why I bring up the local options tax on sales again. And there's some questions that have come in from business owners that I'll address in a little bit, but I want to make sure, Councilor Wazizak, you have your hand up.
Yeah, because I think that we just sort of touched upon an important point that I just kind of want to say out loud, is that we have the local options tax. There are always new grant opportunities. There is and I do have an actual question too, and there's the infrastructure bill and all of that money that's coming from Washington that will come in the form of grants. So I just want, us to be smart about allocating ARPA money versus allocating that money that we'll get from the infrastructure grants. And I'd hate to see us spend ARPA money on something that could have been paid for with another pot of money. And I just want, the council to keep in mind that there's a lot of different funding mechanisms coming at us at once. And we should consider that when we're deciding where to make these investments with ARPA. And then my actual question was, have we received any guidance yet about the infrastructure bill?
Not that I'm aware of.
No? Okay.
So go ahead, Steve.
Well, that prompted me to say, I believe I sent out an email, but I'm not sure if I did. So I'd rely on the council to tell me. We did receive notice that the final rule on ARPA has been issued by Treasury, and I think it was last Wednesday or Thursday. Yeah, I think I put it in my manager's report.
Yeah, it was in
a
there.
500-page document. So I've tasked Dawn with drilling down into that. She's been out for a couple of days, and that's on her list to do. Our general understanding from some of the transmittals are that it significantly increases the flexibility to use the ARPA funding. So it's we're anxious to get into the weeds on it, but we think it's responsive to the requests that came in from across the country. VLCT, I think, was leading the charge for the state of Vermont to make it more flexible and less onerous. And we understand that's what's happened. So we've gotten the final rule on ARPA. Haven't heard anything on infrastructure yet, did it?
Other questions? So we did get some inquiries from the business side of things, wondering about, how we have these funds, they're coming in, there's things at the national level. So, some of the questions are, isn't this what we already pay for? And the way I'm going to explain it is kind of like your tank of gas, right? So anytime you need to do your normal day to day, you have a tank of gas. If you only have $5 that you're using to fill that tank of gas, you're not going to fill it. It's not going to be done. So when you drive to work and back one day, you need to find another $5, or you're just not getting back and forth. You're just not doing that. And it compounds, right? If you still don't have that, it's not in place. So maybe you get an ARPA fund that helps kick that in. So maybe you have another $5 or an infrastructure bill, it's another $5. But when you look at that full tank of gas, you're still not covering it all. And that's really how we have to look at this is there's a certain amount of money that we've been getting, but it has not met the need that the city has. So it's very thankful that ARPA has come through and we have that ability. And it's very thankful that they passed the infrastructure bill. And when we get more guidance on that, how to actually apply using some of these, because I'm pretty sure that you're going to have a local match. So if we have this in place, that's the other piece. You have to be able to have those dollars in order to match to get those other funds. It was also wondered if we were going to implement any of these, is there a predetermined time frame that this would then go away? And I don't think with the number of projects just on this list, which we know isn't comprehensive, we know doesn't include everything for the sidewalk maintenance, or like I was mentioning before, the pipes that lead from the dam. So we could do all the work at the dam, but then we could have a main water line burst, and then we're just still looking for more funds there. So this isn't a comprehensive list at all in order to set that predetermination. So, if this were to go into effect, it would be necessary for both utilization, the best we could for ARPA funds, and taking advantage of that local options tax. One question was, would it prevent people from not shopping in Barre? And the question is, when we talk about the roads side of this, which we haven't even touched on tonight, but because we're talking more ARPA than other funding. But, if somebody has to go over those roads and they're hitting those potholes every time to try to get to that store that they want to go to, they might not want to go that route. So we got to start thinking of that too, is what are other barriers for getting people to those stores? And it's not going to be a possible 1% local options tax. It's probably going to be, can I get there safely, securely, and get the items that I need? Another question was about if this was to go down, if the vote was to fail, would a council say that we would not put it back on in a future year? My response to that is you elect your officials. The officials here are doing what they think is in the best interest of the city and hearing from the residents and the business owners. So if you think about the needs, if we're talking about all these needs and it's not a local options tax or use of ARPA funds, what would that look like if it was actually applied to your tax rate? And I think you would not want to see what that would look like. I mean, we could probably do a calculation for that just to show what $750,000 at least would look like for an increase in cents on your tax rate, which would be pretty significant.
Well, it'd be 20 cents, 20 cents or more.
And 20 cents when we're looking at something closer to a couple of cents is phenomenally different. And then, I think just the conversation from tonight, there were comments that this would be a slush fund. There's no way that this is a slush fund. This is a deferred maintenance that's happened for decades. And it's from underfunding.
Well, it's a combination of deferred maintenance and just the end of service life of utilities that, at best have a 50-year service life and they've been in the ground for 100 years. I mean, the truth be told is there's some deferred maintenance. And why was the maintenance deferred? Because prior councils, prior administrations didn't feel we had the money to undertake those things, or didn't want to raise the tax rate as much as might have been needed. Those are all understandable questions, and I think between the mayor and myself, we'll be prepared to really address those specifically as we do the run up to the town meeting day vote. But I could go on, but we're getting off track. Those questions will be addressed head on as we do the run up to town meeting.
And the last point just to make too is, so we're talking about projects that we know of right now. So if we go ahead 10 years in the future, we've addressed the items that were on this list. We're already going to have another full list of things that are currently in place that now have had that maintenance and life cycle that need to be addressed. So when we're talking about if there is an end date or a sunset to some of these things, I don't see it being in the foreseeable future, honestly.
Well, I mean, again, whatever this capital improvements list as a, let's just say for round numbers, it's 40 million. I mean, $40 million worth of needs doesn't go away. It only gets pushed down the road and it becomes more expensive. Again, I could go on, but we're getting off the focus of the meeting.
So tying it back to just ARPA in general, so we do have the funding request log. And Steve, you had that agenda that you had for the presentation.
Yeah, so the next item, and this is one that goes back to what Councilor Buden was talking about, was decide the target global allocations of the ARPA funds, $2.5 billion. What the example I presented was, it seems to me, let me back up and say one thing. These are my thoughts, and then these are intended to be helpful to help the council think about the process and think about how to go about this and so on. I don't suggest for a minute that I have the only approach here or whatever. What I really am trying to do is put thoughts on the table and allow the council to make the decisions. But it seems to me, understanding there are, I think that's fair to say that it may be competing infrastructure needs, competing city needs versus community needs, such as the housing proposal. It seems to me it would be helpful to the council to make an initial decision of so what's the global allocation of ARPA funds, the $2.5 million? Do you want to say going to spend 50% of it on municipal infrastructure upgrades and 50% on community allocations? And any combination thereof, 75, 25, vice versa. It seems to me that that's a logical starting point. And if the council agrees, that's maybe something you want to try to decide now. If not, we'll just keep going down the list. But I think in order to move ahead with the ARPA program, I think the council needs to sooner than later now, we're at the point to decide, okay, how are we going to go about this? And this is what this outline in this workshop is intended to do.
So noting that, I think you're on step 4 here.
Yes, yep.
And you have noted that the housing proposal would be a part of the community allocations.
Yep.
It's not a separate one. Okay, I just want to make sure, just so that we know which buckets
Yep.
and what that is meant. So council, 2.5 million, it would be roughly 1.25 million, according to what the manager is suggesting for eligible municipal infrastructure upgrades, and the other 1.25 for community allocations. Is that something that council wants to entertain, or would you like to approach it differently? Councillor Wazizak and then Councillor Booten.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. So I think that my initial reaction would be to allocate 1.5 million for infrastructure and leave the other $1 million for community or other city government needs. I think that we have a lot of small needs, quote unquote, small needs in the city, like the digitizing of records, for example. That does not take up a huge chunk of ARPA money, but I think that that would be a huge step forward for just the functioning of the city government to digitize as many records as possible. But I also want to be sure that we are listening to the community, that we have these, housing is one of them. We have 2 other task forces that have been set up as part of the All In for Barre process. And like I talked about a couple of weeks ago, we don't have all of the great ideas. We don't know everything. And there are, I'm sure, folks in the community, and I've been, directly reached out to by some constituents asking about when is the appropriate time for them to bring their ideas on how to spend the ARPA money to the council. So I think that, like I said, my gut reaction would be 1.5 infrastructure, the other 1 for housing, for river access, and the community center, just to use the 2 all-in examples. But I also want to see a deliberate RFP type of process, maybe a public hearing, I don't know, where we invite members of the community to submit their ideas to the council, to the manager. And of course, there's going to be vetting involved. Someone could have a great idea on how to spend $1 million and it's just not ARPA eligible. And that's unfortunate, but it's just the reality. So I think that, like I said, that's my gut on how I would allocate the money, but I want to make sure that we have as much information available to us before we actually decide dollar amounts.
Councilor Booton, and then Steve.
Yeah, I definitely don't want to decide dollar amounts tonight. Once again, I'll get back to my original comment, which is I want to see the list that city staff has of items that need to be done. That would take up that ARPA money, the top tier list. And then we can make that decision as to whether or not, the whatever item it is takes a higher priority than one that's being presented by someone else. I don't have a problem with soliciting the public on it, but I want to see that list before we make any decisions about percentages of going to this, that, or the other.
Steve?
Trying to respond to a couple of questions. I don't think there's any question. In fact, we've got, well, I haven't added them up. There's no question that we could provide a list of infrastructure and facilities projects that would consume the whole $2.5 million. So I'm not sure that that's I mean, if the council were to decide we're going to do 100% to infrastructure projects, and I know that's theoretical, if you will, we can provide the list that would consume $2.5 million. But I think before you get there, you need to again decide this global allocation. And the other point that I would make is that as I had prepared this, and I said decide 50%, decide what allocation to municipal infrastructure upgrades. I guess as I reflect on this list, which has been refined since I put together this outline, I'm using infrastructure in the broad sense of the word. In my mind, that includes what you might typically think of infrastructure as pipes and stuff in the ground and things like that, but also including facilities. We've got maybe $400,000 worth of facilities improvements. No, actually more than that. Almost $750,000 of facilities improvements. So as I use the word infrastructure, I don't mean to be excluding the facilities items that are on that list, and even the operations items for that matter. But so it's really it maybe a more apt description is a decision about the percentage allocation between city needs, I'll say city needs versus community needs or requests. So I'm just trying to elaborate a little bit on that.
Sure, and I'm just going to relabel. So on that, under that section 4, example A was eligibility for municipal infrastructure, which means infrastructure, facilities, and operations.
Right.
And the difference between that and what the community one would be, the manager had offered a 50-50, and Councilor Wazizak had noted basically it's a 60-40 instead. The 60% would be toward those eligible municipal infrastructure, facilities, operations type items. And then 40% would be the community allocations. Councilor Stockwell?
This doesn't seem to me like the best way to do things. Is this considered the best way to sort of arbitrarily say this is where we'll do the global commitments, allocations? Because it seems to me what you want is the thing that's going to make the most change in the city. It's going to create long-lasting change. They'll create a stronger base that will grow the grand list. That should be the concern or the discussion about our priorities. What are we going to do that's going to increase the amount of money in Barre, increase the number of people? That seems to me the thing that's critical rather than an arbitrary formula. I think the proposals coming in should offer a capacity for change that we don't have otherwise. And for facilities, auditorium and the BOR are really have been in the red for a long time. I would not want to invest a lot of money in them unless we have a strong plan for how we're going to increase revenue. Otherwise, why put money there if we don't think those buildings are ever going to come into the black? And maybe they easily can. Maybe they can. We have a revenue plan, but we don't have that plan yet. We don't know that that's a good investment.
Other comments? So I think the approach that the manager had offered is really trying to see how much money is in each one of the buckets, so that, do we start chipping away at projects that, instead of it becoming an emergency costs usually send a project through the roof. If we can plan it out ahead of time, it kind of gets rid of some of that cost. But without having numbers, I agree with you. It's difficult to see what the cost benefit would be for that versus another type of program. The other thing is, even with the housing, if we call that the community allocation, we don't even know if $1 million would actually be used, right? That's something that it's being proposed. It would be something that's earmarked for now. We would see what, because did we get feedback from the housing task force about this yet?
David is here.
So, if there is feedback, great. And if there isn't, it would allow for at least some kind of structure to be set out there for people to bounce off from. If they said there's $1 million for this process, and then there's 1.5 that's going to go toward infrastructure, it kind of gives a framework to it. So to your point, we don't have that other data right now, and it would take, I'm going to assume, quite a bit of time to come together with all the information on the revenues, the grants, if there were any, and that would be a project by project basis. And really, that's what we would need from staff, is what are the priority projects, and that's why the manager mentioned before, something might even bump up if we had more outside funding that would come to it. And that's what changes that rollout. The how much is it really costing the city for any one of those projects?
So I offer an observation here, and that is, you may not want to do a fixed allocation, but to consider them targets. And then to ask your submitters, and again, it may be something that the council does itself, but if you have them ranked in terms of within each category, what do you think are most important? And rank beyond whatever your available funding is, on the basis that the council may make a decision that, okay, we're at 980 here, but if we went to 1.1, we gain something dramatic. And the problem with any fixed number is that if it becomes a blockade to making good decisions. So the idea of choosing a proportionate distribution for targets helps shape how many and I want to say the level of public interest you'll gain. It needs to be a high enough number to keep people interested and excited, and to give you good, well thought out ideas. And then to have a process to rank them within each of those categories. And you can fund them. And then when you get near those boundaries, you can actually compare them and make the decision how to choose that. Because when you look at the whole basket of opportunity, it's confounding, because it's so general and so promising. But if you can take away kind of the low-hanging fruit in each category, and then say, now we've got a fiscal constraint, this is all the money we have, and you can allocate a comparative mechanism, it'll help you make those final decisions. If you try to force yourself to make them before you have the information, it's a really tough place to be. And I hear that as one of our issues, is how do we know we're allocating it to the right place? And I think as you start out, you can't know. But if you can structure your process so that as you get to that point of making some of those decisions, you're empowered to decide freely. And that's where switching from a ranked basis to a comparative basis between your two categories could help you. I don't know if that's useful, but as listening to this, I think from the infrastructure side, we can try to build a well-detailed list for the manager to present you with costs, and you can look at it and say, okay, we understand this is the staff recommendation for priority. We want number 5 to become number 2. And you can change that priority within each category. And then you could move over in your other category and look at those and say, okay, we like this ranking. And then proceed through the rankings until you get to your dollar target. When you get at that dollar target, free yourself up to say, okay, now we're not just going to sit looking at each category. We're going to look openly across comparing. And so picking a proportionate share helps you to do some of the easy stuff and get it out of the way. And when you get into that hard stuff, which is how do we decide which is more important, then you have that free discussion about comparison, and it helps you to make the final decision.
Mr. Henrik?
I like that approach, Bill. And when I think about the big challenges in front of the city, I mean, it's a revenue challenge, it's an infrastructure challenge. And maybe just to be able to take a step forward, even if it's somewhat conceptual, is that $1 million for infrastructure, $1 million for housing, which is future grand list, and $500,000 for community innovation. And where we could have the process that Councilor Wazazak's talking about to bring in other ideas from organizations in the city that leverage additional funding and make investments in innovative projects here in the city. And that might be a way to get things going. And when it comes to infrastructure, I've been a bit critical on the condition of the infrastructure, and it's not because the city staff is not working hard. It's like Lucy in the chocolate factory, right? It's like all the needs are just coming at you faster than you can handle, and the city council and the funding is not there to address all the needs that need to happen. And unless there's just major restructuring of the city organization and budget, it's got to be revenues like this or a local option tax that start lining funds up with projects and doing the things that the voters say they want to see happen. So.
Yeah, a couple of thoughts. One, so the allocation concept that you just talked about is exactly what I was trying to prompt by this item. It's not to say that really what I had here was an example to just try to put food for thought out there. But if that were the decision of the council as manager, I'm fine with that. So I guess that's exactly the kind of discussion I was hoping would come out of this. The other thing that I would caution against is I put $1 million in here because that was the figure in the housing proposal. But what we got to look at with whatever proposals we have are time-based expenditures. These expenditures have to be committed by 2024, 2 years from now. So, and I don't understand how the housing proposal gets to $1 million, but my sense is, but there are some revolving loan or time-based types of things in there. So we'd have to see how that works with the ARPA regulations, and it may well be that because of the time constraints, maybe the proposal, maybe only a 200,000 or 500,000 or whatever can be allocated to that proposal. We've got to figure that out. So the housing proposal, if it were approved and accepted, may not consume $1 million. It may be something less. My instincts tell me it would be something less just because of the time issues. But so I just throw that out as an observation, and we'll have to work through it and figure out.
Yeah, I'd just respond by saying, just like our tax stabilization, you enter into an agreement. So if there was something or many different people that were to take advantage of a program, we would have a policy in place that said, this is our agreement and you must adhere to it. The downside of that is if they didn't take advantage of the funds, then we would have obligated to a certain program that would not be taking advantage of it. So I think as we approached that deadline, it's 2 years out from now, more than 2 years out from now, there would be that consideration, call it July 1st of 2024, to reevaluate how much funds are left there to then apply to something else, which would probably be directly to infrastructure. If someone hasn't taken advantage of the program, we would want to make sure that we use the funds to the full extent.
Yeah, it's certainly not a one and done program. It's really something that's needs to be carefully managed over the next 4 years, really, to the expended completion date, but certainly over the first 2 years in terms of where the obligations are going to make. So again, we have to get down into the weeds in terms of the eligibility criteria, but there's a lot of constraints that we'll have to make sure that we're meeting.
So with that, Councilor Hemrick, I think I do like your layout of the 40-40-20 and splitting out the housing from the other community allocations. And then that does give a process for an application from the public, which I think Councilor Wazisak was alluding to as well. And it leaves $1 million in the infrastructure area. I think the other points that were brought up were we do have a water and sewer fund. We do need to make sure that we have that conversation with Barrytown on, how much this is going to be split across. And then also for having a separate conversation with the local options tax, how that's going to be applied to probably not water and sewer projects at all, in my opinion. It would be more of the streets, the sidewalks, and the other thing that we don't have here, which is the all the equipment. You think about vehicles that are expiring and things like that.
Yeah.
Now, the local option tax couldn't go to the enterprise funds unless it was so listed in the charter.
And that's what we just need to make sure that we're clear about as we approach town meeting day of these are the buckets and this is why, this is how much is in each area, and understanding these funds cannot be used for these other areas. And it might come down to a graphic at some point, a one pager that we can define for people so they can say, this is why ARPA is being used here. This is why we're asking for the local options tax.
Just so I get it captured, Council, you said $1 million to infrastructure, $1 million to
Housing.
The housing program
housing programs, and then $500,000
to community innovation.
community.
I liked that wording, the way you worded that.
And just to be clear, the housing program is more than a revolving loan program.
No, I understand.
I mean, this target is to get to 20 million. It's going to take more than $200,000, and it's the idea of a revolving loan fund, land banking for redevelopment, and housing grants as conceptual ideas that a program manager could start to evaluate and then bring back to city council.
And when you mention infrastructure, I'm working under the assumption that similar to what Councilor Wazisak had said, and we sort of fleshed out, that includes facilities and operations, that it's all that.
So Councilor Wazisak, Councilor Booton, comments, questions?
Yeah, I mean, I think that sounds good. And just reiterating that those are not dollar amounts set in stone, but just general guidelines for how we'll be allocating the funds. And I don't know if it's a tonight conversation, but I'm just very interested to see how we move forward in that. Getting a priority, like Councilor Booton was talking about, because I do think infrastructure is the largest financial liability that we have as a city. Getting that list of priority projects, I'm just interested to see how we go forward with engaging the community and fleshing out the housing proposals.
Do you have anything else?
Just that I agree with the idea of the $1 million for housing, $1 million for infrastructure, and the 500,000 for community.
So the process questions.
Yeah, so again, and I don't, I'm not saying this is the exact order, but one of the questions that I thought the council needed to answer is, so is the council going to solicit requests for proposals or community input or whatever? And if you are, it seems like there needs to be a formal notification of that process, and then a definition of a solicitation period, whether that's 60 days or 90 days or whatever, whatever the council brings to that. So the first question is, are you going to have a solicitation process? And if so, then is there a time frame for that?
So I think the answer to the first part is yes, and I'm just going to see if anyone objects. The second part for the timeline, I think we want to be after town meeting day for one. Maybe as far as June 30th for a deadline. And part of that is it's going to take a lot of time to create these other lists as well and have those conversations on housing. So if we were to try to have an apples to apples comparison, it's going to take some time to get that other information together. Maybe June 30th is too far out. I'm just throwing it out there.
It's nowhere near far enough out. To me, it seems like there are a lot of other questions that the council, or perhaps a subgroup of the council, a work group, something, or task force, whatever the different definitions are, would want to work on. I can imagine trying to work your way through, are there some organizations that, do you want to put any criteria on the types of organizations or individuals or whatever that could apply? Would you take applications from individuals? Do you want to require matching funds? Do you want, I mean, what kinds of projects would be eligible? What sort of narrative questions? To me, there are a million questions that you would want to sort of wrap your hands around first before you would then open it up to the community. And I can see that taking several months to put a shape on that. You know, we do have 3 years, almost 3 years before we have to obligate the money, have it contracted. And it seems to me that what makes the most sense is to make sure that that spade work has been done well before you start soliciting projects. Because again, we're going to end up with $1 million worth of requests in a $500,000 bucket.
Yeah,
And being able to put some shape on it will just make that job easier at the end. So, you know, you define, what does community innovation mean? And so, you know, do the projects, and that helps people shape what they would want to put together for a project. So I think there's a lot of those bits and pieces that need to be done before you start talking about timelines.
Mm-hmm. But we kind of need a timeline for the timeline, right? So we kind of have to have an understanding of, do we want to set up, like you noted, is it going to be a work group of council? Do we want to set up a task force to bring that together? And that's going to take time itself.
Yeah.
So, sorry, there was Michael Deering, you had your hand up?
You actually had answered my question, Mr. Mayor.
Okay. And then
Thank you.
Councilor Boot, yep, Councilor Booton.
So I don't know if we want to model it somewhat after the Sepperbond process. I think that was a pretty good process. I know that there might be somebody that disagrees with me, but I think that model definitely, you know, allowed for a specific, you know, I think it worked, but I'll look towards Carol, as she probably was closer to that than me.
Yeah, so since you mentioned my name, I think the one opportunity that was missed with that was suggesting that there be at least thought towards matching funds or other available funding. There were many of the projects that were funded were one and done. We wrote them a check, they went out and bought whatever it was they wanted. And while every one of them was a worthy cause, you certainly wouldn't say that they were all community innovation. And the ones that were most successful, in my opinion, were the ones where they used their Semperbond allocation as a stepping stone, as seed money, and they turned it over 2-3 times with as matching funds for grants and other things like that. And that to me is what's exciting and an opportunity. So, you know, those are the kinds of things that I would like to see incorporated in whatever kind of program goes forward.
Yeah, I'm just thinking that the process itself, like having the committee, they did the work on that, and I think that I thought that was a success, that part of it, but I might be alone.
Could you just give it was a while ago now that fund was set up. Could you give an overview of what that process looked like? Like that generalized process that you're talking about?
I'm sure we have documents that we could probably send
Oh, we got
out.
all kinds of documents. Essentially what happened was the Charles Semperbond left the bulk of his estate, which is about $2.3 million to the city. The only restriction being it couldn't be spent on general fund expenses, operational kind of expenses. We created a committee of people. We solicited requests for funding. We didn't put any kind of restrictions on them. It was pretty open. The committee reviewed all the applications, interviewed people, came back with a recommendation, a chart of these were the submissions. This is our recommendation for the funding. Council reviewed the request, and with the exception of a very few, council approved the allocations. The other thing that I would say is that I think that part of the problem is that there were people making requests that sat on the committee. And I would think that would be something you'd want to avoid.
Yeah, everything except that last part sounds great. Because I do think we should be giving a pretty wide because we have to understand that there is already a net for this money. There is a spectrum of things that this can be spent on already through the ARPA guidelines. So within those guidelines, I would lean towards a more liberal process of just, if you have ideas, bring them to us, and then we can weed them out from there. But I do like the idea of having like a smaller group to be able to work through some of those finer details and work with Carol on some of those questions and some of those opportunities that she sees for matching funds, et cetera. So I think that would be a good place to start. And perhaps that group, Mr. Mayor, could abide by your June 30th, July 1st. That could be a target date for having some of these processes ready to go.
Well, and if we call it a work group, we can set it up of counselors that set this up. If we call it a task force, we can go through a process to get a group of people, of residents together to help out. So either way, I'm fine with it. The one thing that was brought up about taking advantage of other funds, if you think about our infrastructure upgrades and projects, usually there's grants that go along with it. So we have to have a certain match that then does take advantage of other funds. The same thing is going to most likely be with housing. We would either find matching funds, or it provides financial sustainability to the city because it's growing the grand list. So if we keep it on par, we really are saying, if this is going to be a community project that comes in, there probably should be something other than just we're handing them a check for something. There's going to be some sort of way to take advantage of those funds to make sure that it's on par with the rest of the programming. So I think that is a great suggestion. So
Mr. Deering has his hand up again.
Sure. So the one question, just to ponder in the back of your mind is, I'm leaning more toward a task force rather than a council group, because I know that there's a number of counselors that are already sitting on housing or other items. So if we could take advantage of others in the city to come up with that programming, and then probably be that vetting group as well, similar to what Semperbond was, that group. Is anyone on, just have it in the back of your mind while I see what Mr. Deering has for a question. Michael, do you have another question?
Mr. Mayor, honestly, I agree with that, idea of a task force. As long as there's equal representation between the wards, and possibly even having an at-large person there to be able to kind of be maybe a difference maker between, the equal representation of the wards, not to sway one way or the other, but to have a different light of view.
So if council isn't opposed, I think what we can do is we can place on a upcoming agenda just the setting up of a task force, and not to make that decision tonight, but then we can have those discussions on composition and a little bit more of the outline of what we'd like to see as part of that process to give them guidance.
Yeah, and I would just offer that I completely understand Mr. Deering's point. But we, especially when it comes to infrastructure, we want to make sure that the infrastructure money is not being, poured into only Ward 1 while Wards 2 and 3 aren't getting any. But we should just, this task force will have to keep in mind that this is citywide. This money isn't meant to benefit one ward over the other. It's meant to benefit the whole city.
You're not picking on Ward 1, are you, Councilor Wazza?
Well, if I have to pick one to pick on, might as well be Ward 1. But
I think a majority of us could pick on it, so we don't need to pick on anyone.
So just to be sure I'm clear that the direction is to form a task force that will help define or will define what the
Application criteria.
solicitation process, yeah, and the target date for having that task force organized. Anybody got a suggestion for that?
Well, we're gonna have to first have the conversation with council, so
Okay.
let's have that
Yep.
as a
Yep.
conversation,
Yep.
either next
Yep.
week or the week after.
Just a question.
Sure,
The task force is for the community portion, correct?
correct. And I think, it's a good point. So the infrastructure piece, I think staff has already started providing that information for the housing. If we keep it at that 40% or the $1 million, that's the conversation that can continue to happen with the housing task force. And they can come back with recommendations as well. So there's already a group established that can assist with that. Unless anyone has any objections to that.
no, but that was a good clarifier. Thank you.
Any other questions for you, sir?
Nope.
Okay, so with that, I'll take on with the manager, the task force piece. Let's say in 2 weeks, because we always know we want to do next week, but it's going to take time. Okay,
It's the 25th.
Yeah, and 25th is really busy. You might want to go to the first meeting in February.
okay, we'll do that now. I think that's February 1st, correct?
Thank you, Mike.
Something like that. Yeah, it would be. The same.
Okay. Okay, so if no other discussion on that, that was our only topic, other than housing being pulled from it for a little bit beforehand.
I'm going to, while you're doing, do you have roundtable or not?
We have a roundtable coming.
Okay, I need to get counselor signatures on the authorization to conduct tax sales that was part of the consent agenda, so.
Okay, so with that, Counselor Wozniak and Counselor Booton, make sure that you have set up some time to come in and sign the document that's currently going around here. And then I'll start with both of you for the roundtable. Counselor Wozniak?
Pass.
So you just said pass, correct?
Yes.
Okay,
Oh, actually, I'm so sorry. Can I take that back? I just thought of something.
absolutely.
No,
Sorry,
no, take it back.
I knew there was something. Yes, there are a couple of vacancies on the Aldrich Library Board of Trustees. And so some trustees have already started to reach out to folks that they think may be interested or a good fit on the board, but really anyone is welcome to throw their hat in the ring. So if you're interested in becoming a Barre City trustee for the Aldrich Library, please reach out to myself or Lauren Polk at the library, and we can have that conversation. And now I will pass.
Thank you. Counselor Booton?
So I posted on Front Porch Forum, and I also posted on the Barre City Community fan page about the budget and the local options taxes. The responses that I got were surprising, meaning not surprising to me, but surprising I mean, it was surprising to me, but some of the people that responded that I would expect that would support our budget the way that it is and the local options tax, they were not supportive of it. One person, there was quite a few. I received probably 15, 20 responses, and of the 15, 20 responses, 3, 4 were supportive. And that is a little concerning. I know that as we are going to have one of our final discussions shortly about it, I personally would like to see a budget, and it's going to cause some heartburn with Steve. But I would like to see a 0% increase budget for this year. And I understand that, you know, we've got a lot of things, but we're also struggling. Our community is struggling financially right now. They're struggling because of increases in inflation and increasing in energy costs and all of these things that are increasing, and our city budget. And I understand that, you know, our budget has to go up just like, but where we have an opportunity to use some of that surplus to defend off that for 1 year. And that's my request. And I don't know if city council wants to do that. And if city council doesn't want to do that, that's your choice. But I think we should see it.
So Steve, you can correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe next week on the agenda, we'll have the last conversation, hopefully, for the budget. It sounds like you're going to see if any of those items that we haven't cut previously are items that council would reconsider. The other part of that is we'll have the FY22 second quarter update, I believe.
Yep.
Don will be here for that. And then we should be having the conversation on local options tax, which probably would be an expansion on this current capital improvement plan that would talk about how that could be applied to some of the capital streets and other programs. So I think that's pretty good timing. I think that addresses what you're talking about.
I would just like to see the budget at a 0%, what that would look like. That's all. But I don't know if we need council to agree with that. So, because that's going to take time for Steve, and I don't want to put something forward or ask him to do something if this council doesn't even want to see it.
Yes. Council, do you think you want to see a budget down to a 0%?
Well, to me, that really hits me as a last minute request. We've been talking about the budget for many months now. It's started at 5%. At no point in any previous conversation have you mentioned this as a benchmark, Councilor Booton, and before you were talking about 3 or 2, and now it's down to 0. I think that's a significant change from your prior positions at the 11th hour, in my view.
Okay, and I understand that, but it's a response to, you know, the community that I represent. So that's okay.
I would just say that a 0% budget is not financially responsible and simply kicks the bills of the city down the road. Those bills come due eventually, and we have to pay them. And yes, and people are still absolutely struggling. One of the reasons people are struggling is because there's no more help coming from the federal or the state government for people who are struggling. A lot of the programs, the food assistant programs that I work with in my day job on a daily basis have since expired and are not being re-upped by the federal and state government while prices do continue to rise. And so I'm absolutely sympathetic. I work on food security issues as my full-time day job. But the bills for the city are rising too, and just kicking the can down the road is not realistic.
So just the feel is, I don't think that we need to have the manager go through that process to create a 0. If you have ideas that you want to bring, there's been items that were presented from the manager previously, and I would say that would be, you don't have anything new to add to the conversation, I don't think.
Well, the new thing that we'll have is just a discussion about how to deal with the advice from VLCT that says we can't have the allowance built in for the errors and omissions. That's about a $50,000 change. So I'll provide some guidance there. I mean, that's the, I think that's the only substantive new tweak that we'll have. But my goal was to provide one, I'll say final, for lack of a better word, one final opportunity to take a last look at the budget and try to reach a consensus on it before the meeting on the 25th, where we got to set the tax rate. In my mind, I think.
No, yeah.
The warning. I think Carol would agree. We want to have if there's any more substantive discussion about the budget, we should have that and reach a conclusion and not try to have that discussion the same night that we're setting the warning. The night of deciding the warning language and numbers should be rather perfunctory. It shouldn't be a last opportunity for a 2-hour debate.
No, and I think we have next week to do that. And then it sets us up for the 25th for making
Yes.
sure that the wording's done.
And Mr. Mayor, last week's roundtable, you mentioned something about the errors and omission reserve, the 1%.
Well, that's what I was talking
That's
about.
what
Okay,
I was
that's,
talking
okay, so that's,
Yeah,
That's
so
it.
that's a 1 cent that's currently in, if you look at the sheet, it's
Okay.
listed as a 1 cent amount. And basically, we were gonna have to make the decision of, does that mean we remove it, or is there some portion that we want to have?
Yeah, and
as-
I'll have a hopefully a very informative package about that as part of the packet on Friday, so that you can be prepared for the discussion on Tuesday.
And if I could just say one more thing, just to be, for the record, like no one wants to raise people's bills. No one wants the city to be more of a financial burden on any of our residents. But there is just, it costs money to run a municipal government in 2022. And we have to be honest about those costs. And I don't think that a 0% would be honest.
So,
I get that. And the housing proposal tonight added $35,000 in staff, allocation for money. So that's the kind of thing that, we have to think about. And I've said it multiple times where, the priorities that we as a council are setting are creating more staff. And it does cost more money. And yeah, that's okay. You can disagree with that, but it is the case. And that's okay.
Councilor Shambell, do you have anything for roundtable?
It's way off the subject, but as the COVID rates keep on skyrocketing, I just encourage people to stay masked, take care of yourselves, take care of your kids. Your kids are suffering in schools. And I guess just let's be kind to each other.
Councilor Stockwell?
I just want to thank DPW for salting the Berlin sidewalk. It is now possible to easily walk up and down the Berlin sidewalk. It's great.
Thank you. Councilor Emmerich?
Thanks, Mayor. Periodically, I look through these postcards I sent out during my first campaign. I left a lot of postcards that people could send back what was important to them. And so I refer back to those. I refer back to surveys, like last town meeting survey. I think about the conversations that we've had, and early in the budget discussion, I had a goal in mind of 2%. This budget's under that 2%. I'm so proud of the hard work this council did to get there. I think it's and staff. And because it was not easy to get there. Not everything that I was hoping to see in that budget, based on the feedback that I've heard from the community, is in that budget. That's the nature of compromise, right? But we're almost there, and I'm really proud about where things have landed, and I'm proud because I think it starts to turn the city in a good direction, and that's making investments for long-term grand list growth and getting ahead of our infrastructure problems. And to do that, it takes people. And we see that in the request for an assistant public works director, an assistant planner, to keep the city hall clean, the custodian positions. I know, it's easy to disparage those new positions as not needed, but the city staff has said they are needed. And this, I think that the people of the city want to see problems solved. And just like it takes work to go out to get wood, to put it in the wood stove, it takes a person to do that. That's what it takes at city government too. So I think these are good investments. I think that although the local option tax is a tough conversation, we don't get ahead unless we start, unless we change the way we're doing business and look at these new revenue sources. And we'd like to be in a position where we're not Lucy in the chocolate factory every day. So there's a sell ahead to explain this to the voters, not just ask them, do they want more staff and new taxes, but to explain these are the things behind this. And that's going to be on all of the counselors to communicate that message, to really be honest and transparent about what the city's facing, and to change the future. And I think we're on a good course here.
So I'm just going to piggyback up on that a little bit, just to make sure that we're letting people know now. These are the conversations that are coming next week and the week after. I encourage anyone that has ideas, if you have some area that you think could be cut, if you have something that's another revenue source, I think anyone from council would gladly take any input from anyone from the community to talk about that. We've also now set up a framework to start those conversations with ARPA. We have the information, and we'll have continually updated information on how the funds would be used if it was from the local options tax. And to your point, that's what we need so that we can have that information, so we can get it out to the rest of the public so they're aware. And the last thing is just noting that we have those items for the town meeting day ballot. And I just want to make sure we get feedback from Oliver on the items that we
Yeah.
need to.
He's promised to give me his legal opinion by the end of this week. So
Perfect.
when we are talking about charter stuff next week, we'll be able to, we'll have his opinion.
So it sounds like all those things are coming to the time frame that we need, which is on the 25th. And then from there, we can make sure that we do that promotion that's needed so that everyone is aware of what's on the ballot and why. So with that, I don't think we have anything for an executive session. Okay, so I'll look for a motion to adjourn.
So moved. Second.
All those in favor, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
And opposed, nay. Thank you very much. We are adjourned. Have a good night,
Good
everyone.
night, all. Good night,
Hi,
Mike.
everybody.